of these people, and she has no idea what I'm going to ask her. Well, she might have a little idea about what I'm going to ask her, but also I hope you will be thinking of questions that you have, and I'd also ask Emma to think of questions that she has, because what I hope we will all get from our time together are really two things. One, a better sense of who Emma is, so that we can continue to share a ministry with Emma in various ways. And I also hope that all of us will leave with a deeper sense of what God has been doing and will be doing among the youth and the volunteers who care for our youth here in this church. Come on in, come on in. So without further ado, let's just start and get to know Emma. Emma, welcome.
Hello.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
I hope by the time we're done, you're still glad to be here.
Yes.
Can
you all hear me?
But why don't you start, if you would, by telling us a little about yourself.
Okay. Hi. I'm Emma Mitchell. Some of you know me because I was a youth here once upon a time. I grew up at St. Paul's and graduated Fayetteville High School. Went to college out in Colorado, moved to Little Rock, and that is where I've been the last 6 to 8 years. Can't do the math. And I've just always been doing work with youth and children, and finally did that in a full-time, or moved into a full-time church context in the last couple years, and then, but wasn't specifically working with youth and really missed it. And so this has kind of afforded me the opportunity to work with youth and for the church. And I'm really excited to be here. If you need to know something about me, you should know that I'm an introvert, and sitting in front of all of you is a little painful, but I'm very excited. I just, might get a little nervous. And yeah, what else?
It's all for the kids.
It's all for the kids.
Tell us, what's your favorite restaurant in Northwest Arkansas?
Y'all are gonna laugh, but I really loved and missed La Huerta when I was gone. La Hercha Stomach. And it was the first place I ate at when we moved up here. I really missed it. That queso, I hope it will not stay my favorite forever, because I'm very excited. As my husband Dave and I were driving around, we were like, ooh, we can eat there, and we might eat there, and there's a food truck next to our house, and yeah, we're gonna eat at all the new places.
Great. Tell us, Emma, if you would, what happened to your ankle?
Well, I had a beautiful array of plants on my back step in my old house, and then I packed those plants into a car, and then that night I walked out the back door and there were no longer plants to block the way, and so I tripped off the back step and landed in a hole that my dogs had dug. And so it's sprained badly, maybe torn, not broken, and I just have to crutch around in a boot for a little bit so it heals. So it's really dramatic and silly.
I figure you might ask that, so I thought I'd go ahead and ask it.
Yeah.
Emma,
Or my fanciest sock for you all.
what are some words that you would use to describe your experience as a youth at St. Paul's?
Oh. Nerdily enthusiastic. I really enjoyed youth, and I really enjoyed being a part of a church community. As a teenager who was welcomed as though I was a member of the church, not just, so-and-so's kid. I would say maybe, I don't know what the word is, like formational? I'm gonna say formational. Formational in that I felt like I was allowed to believe exactly what I wanted to believe and where I was on my faith journey, and I could kind of explore that and ask questions. And that was really good for me personally, to be able to feel like I had that space. I had other friends growing up in other youth groups that didn't, when we talk at school, like they weren't allowed to ask questions at their church. And so I felt really, I don't know what the word is, but allowed to be who I was. I don't know what the word for that would be, which was helpful because here I am today.
Thanks.
I made it.
Thank you. I'll ask this question, then I'll ask you if you have any questions for me, and then we'll engage the crowd in a minute. What are 2 of your favorite activities to do with a youth group, and what is one of your least favorite activities to do with a youth group? 2 favorites and 1 least favorite.
2 favorites. I really enjoy making things that aren't competitive. like bowling and pool. Well, there are people who are competitive bowlers, and I'm sorry if that's you in this room. I didn't mean to not competitive bowling. But things like pool and games and hyping them up and making them like weirdly competitive for no real prize, I find sheer joy in that. So any sort of like large group games. And then I really like to talk to teenagers about God. So sorry if that's not a fun answer, but I really like to hear from youth about like what they're thinking and how they interpret scripture and how they get involved in worship. I just find that they're better at it sometimes than adults are. My least favorite thing, I mean, I like to eat and I enjoy eating with youth, but it's kind of like sharks to blood sometimes, and it can be stressful to like make sure everyone gets a slice of pizza before, or that we like pray before we all get a slice of pizza. So that's maybe when I get the most stressed out working with youth, is like the eating moment. But
I like that.
that's an easy one to overcome.
And I offered you the chance to ask questions, so I'll move to that. But in a minute, I would love to hear more about ways that youth get worship in God better than adults. That's a powerful thing you said, and I don't want to lose it. But what questions or might you have for me?
Evan, what excites you about youth ministry at this church?
Emma, thank you. I love the fact that we have several different youth communities that are a part of our group. We see some really faithful people on Sunday mornings, and a different group of faithful people on Sunday evenings, and a different group of faithful people on Wednesdays. There are, of course, overlaps, but I love the fact that this church has found ways to meet the needs and be involved in the life of our youth, depending on what their schedule is. I really like that. I also really like that this youth group is a place that allows and trusts youth to be themselves, that doesn't sort of impose an ideal of what we believe or how we behave or who we are or what we look like, that instead the ideal that we offer is that everyone has equal value because they are equally loved, equally valued by God, and because of the way that we approach that, because we are willing to accept and include and celebrate anyone, not only are we then able to say that God loves everybody, we can show it with how we are. That's really exciting for me. And one other thing I really like is I really like Sunday suppers. I really like the fact that core to our youth identity and our youth group is serving others in our community. I love the fact that Sunday suppers has, for the most part, been a ministry of our youth, not exclusively, but largely a ministry of our youth. And related to that, I love that in the listening sessions with youth and with parents or other concerned or committed adults, that in every session, what was consistently named as a high priority for us, something that we value and something that we hope to continue to do, is Sunday suppers and the outward service mentality that it instills. Those are things that I love about our youth program.
I will say that when I told people I was coming to St. Paul's to do youth work, they said things like, oh my gosh, that place has just always had like a really stellar youth program, and there's like this magical umbrella that lives over St. Paul's that like is not in any other church we've ever been at. And I have not been in other churches that have the same kind of willingness for the whole community to commit to the youth program. The fact that y'all did listening sessions and a search committee, and just there was more involvement from people who don't even necessarily have a kid in the youth program and said, we value this as part of our church community, it's very unique and really cool. It does not happen in all the churches, in the Episcopal churches in Arkansas.
Yeah. Something to celebrate.
It is, yeah, it's exciting. Excites me.
What else?
Oh, I got really like lost in Sunday
That was
suppers. I was
big.
like,
Yeah,
that was my
big,
question.
yeah.
Maybe, well, do you want me to ask you, can I ask them things?
Sure. You want to ask them questions?
Yeah.
Great.
well,
Let's ask y'all some questions, and then we'll let y'all ask us some questions. What you got?
I kind of want to know, whoa. Oh, you dropped your thing. I kind of want to know what, and youth can chime in, or parents or whoever, kind of what you're looking forward to this year, like what you're excited about. Yeah, raise your hand.
Hold on a second.
Oh.
May I get a volunteer to run the microphone, or one microphone around the room? That'd be great. Thanks.
Frisbee it.
Kristen? Thank you. What are you excited about? Is that the question? Would you repeat it again?
And even if you are going to be a senior and graduate, you can still say something. You can still say something you're excited about.
I wanted to see everyone have fun. Because, like, I want
Everyone
to
have
come
fun.
back for a break and, like, come in and have
Just
fun.
enter.
Yeah. That's
Got
what
you.
I want.
To know we're having fun?
Yeah.
Did I see a hand? Yep. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be interested to know what you think is the greatest need of youth today, and how do you plan to address that need?
Great. Would you, Mr. Batson, would you hold on to that? Hold on to that question. That's a really good one, and we're going to come back to that. But before we ask that, I want to know if anybody has an answer to Emma's question, which is, what are you looking forward to this year? And then we'll come back to that because that's a great question.
And
Plus, I
maybe
want to
not
give her a
just,
chance to think
can I
about it.
expand it, not just the youth program, but maybe just in this
Yeah.
upcoming fall-ish to December, Christmas-y time, like what excites you about being here and you're looking forward to?
Thanks. Avery, right in the middle. Hold your hand up way high. Thanks.
Are we still gonna do EYC?
Are we still going to do EYC? Yeah, that's why I have a job.
I mean, no, not EYC. I'm sorry. Winter Star.
Say it again.
Winter Star.
Oh, Winter Star? Yes, Winter Star happens, and I don't know the dates for it because it's in the spring next year. Do you mean AYE or Winter Star? AYE is this fall, and then Winter Star will be in the spring-ish time. And yes, those are diocesan events, and those happen on like clockwork. So
And you're
yes,
excited
will
about
happen.
that? Are you excited about them? Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Dave?
So I have an introvert and an extrovert child, and they will both be in UIC this year, and I'm interested to see how they annihilate each other.
I'm an introvert, and my younger sister is an extrovert, and we manage somehow to coexist through life and also in church.
What else are you excited about this fall semester? What are you looking forward to?
Nothing?
Oh, I told her that y'all would participate.
It's okay if you don't.
Bella?
As my last year as a youth participant and having one youth minister my entire life, I am looking forward to facing new challenges, learning new things. I also love you beyond reason. So I'm looking forward to making new memories and being with you and learning new things.
I did not pay her to say that. Thank you. It was very kind of you.
Anything else that you're excited about?
There's a picnic coming up.
Kristen?
Well, I'm looking forward to, because you kind of touched on how we have so many kids who are involved, different days, different programs, maybe gathering everybody together and having all of the kids together and participate in something,
Thank you.
figuring that out.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to football. Not just football, but the fall is a time of great energy and excitement in our community, and I think that spills over into our church community. Even though on Saturdays after an Arkansas game, sometimes people aren't as enthusiastic about waking up on Sunday morning, but there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of enthusiasm that is breathed into our system, and I really get excited about the fall, and football kind of symbolizes that for me.
It's also like 20 degrees cooler up here right now than it is in Little Rock, so I'm very excited for cooler weather and fall. And just like, I feel like the heat of summer kind of makes everyone drag a little, so I'm excited for that.
All right, Mr. Batson had a great question. Let's get him to ask his question again, if you would.
I'd be interested to know what you feel is the greatest need for youth today and how you plan to address that need.
Okay, it's a large question. Well, first of all, I think probably the youth of today could tell you what their problems are better than me. What I personally see in the youth that I work with is maybe just kind of a disconnectedness. I don't think that's like the internet's fault or anything like that, but we're becoming more and more isolated as people, like all of us, everyone with our phones, and just we don't reach out in the same way, and I think there's a nervousness to reach out to each other, maybe for fear of being rejected or fear of, I don't know, all the fears that come with reaching out to someone and kind of putting yourself out there. And so I think with youth, it's important to kind of figure out ways to connect that aren't just, oh, we had the same homework yesterday, or oh, we go to the same school and are on the same soccer team, but kind of connect in other ways. Church is a really different context, and it can be a really special context, and you can make, I have lifelong friends that I grew up with in youth group because we bonded in a way that wasn't about having science in fourth period the same hour. So I think that is kind of that disconnectedness and kind of creating spaces to connect and meet other people, and connecting like with the larger, like folks that are not our age and folks that are older and younger than us, and kind of building a support system. So when you do go off to college or you do go off to work, you kind of have that network and you're not isolated and you're not facing the big adult life challenges by yourself. That's my answer.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions for us or questions for Emma? Emma, do you want to ask the next question?
She has a question.
Just a quick
yes.
one.
Barbara.
You self-described as an introvert earlier, so I would like to ask you, what gives you energy?
Thank you for asking that introvert that question. If anyone's read the book Quiet, I really love it. It's all about introversion and extroversion, and I'm really obsessed with how introversion is misunderstood, because I'm still very social and excited to be with people, but it means at the end of the day I have to kind of be quiet for a little bit, and so I do things like walk my dogs and read and listen to podcasts while I fold laundry that are very singular activities so that I can recharge the batteries, so to speak. That's what I like to do.
You've mentioned to me in the past about how you keep boundaries in order to do that. Would
Love
you
good boundaries.
tell us something about what does that mean for a typical week for you? What's Monday morning like for you after a full Sunday? And where do you reserve space for you to take care of yourself so that you can take care of us?
I think so obviously work in progress, all people are, but I think I'm working very hard. I work very hard at kind of setting emotional boundaries, and when I feel myself like getting, like when your phone's dying and it's like 4%, 3%, 2%, 1%, and you're trying to keep all the apps running and make that last phone call before it dies, like I can feel that very much in myself, and so I often have to kind of recognize that and say, okay, I need to go like take a lunch break by myself, or go do something that fills me up, like sit outside for a little bit, or read a poem, or read some poetry that, like read something that's kind of on a like brain level, not so much like the physical interactions, and then like come back. If I don't do that, you can tell because, well, my ankle has been a really good lesson from the Lord about slowing down. I think it was meant to happen because with moving, I get very like, all my stuff is everywhere and all my people are everywhere and everything's chaotic. And I literally just had to sit there and like watch my stuff get unpacked in my house. So I can feel the batteries kind of starting to die when that happens, and I'm pretty good about being like, okay, it's time to recharge the batteries. Otherwise, I'm gonna start like short circuiting at everyone. So I work very hard on that so that I don't put my stress on others.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
A little window into my soul.
Questions?
Yeah.
So
Are we gonna eat food, good food and coffee? Is that what you're asking? Yes. It's a high priority.
So my question, I have two. One's like a simple one and one's a little bit more complicated. How are you going to include, I have a rising 7th grader and then I have a rising 9th grader. How do you include really younger kids with the older kids? How do you make that happen? And my second question is just a simple one. How are we going to communicate like ahead of time to know what's happening? What's going to be that? Is it going to be a text messaging or that's it?
Let me answer communication first. That's an easy one. So we're gonna do probably like the standard things: email, calendar, like put out a calendar, have email reminders, text reminders. I probably won't call you all unless you want to be called. So kind of standard, like on a regular basis, probably weekly email reminders and things like that. As far as older kids and younger kids, we have a really wide, my understanding is that we have a really wide range of ages in our youth group. So my intention is to kind of start out all together just to kind of see who's coming regularly and see what our ages are, and then eventually split up into different groups as needed. Maybe that's a Wednesday night thing, maybe it's a Sunday morning thing, maybe it's a Sunday afternoon thing. But kind of first see how we are in community all together, and then create spaces for like older kids. Like a senior in high school is not thinking about the same things as a 7th grader. So, and that's a good thing, but just kind of seeing where we're at first and then responding to kind of the needs is my plan, such as it is.
Do you anticipate reserving some time where all the youth will be together? Or do you think every encounter will be age divided?
I think we'll do things all together. I also think it's really important that older kids help mentor the younger kids, because they have obviously been through a lot of the things they're going through and have done it more recently than the rest of us. So like a junior and senior in high school can offer a lot of guidance to an incoming freshman. Well, here it's 10th grade, but incoming 10th graders.
It's freshman.
Yeah. Wait, 10th grade is freshman here? No.
9th grade.
It's okay. Just kidding. 9th graders. Yeah, okay. I got confused. But anyway, so the older kids can be mentors, and I think the younger kids help also kind of remind the older kids to kind of like not be so serious, because they're still kind of great and goofy in a wonderful way.
Thank you. What other questions? Emma, do you have any questions for us?
I had them and I went blank. We're excited about, I don't know, maybe like what you all, like if there's anything you want to see specifically about with the youth program, or like in terms of kids being involved in church, and that might be on Sunday mornings or Wednesdays, but how do you kind of view youth participation in church and like church programs, not just the youth program? Don't all raise your hands at once.
Would you say that again for us, please?
Yeah, more succinctly. I'm trying to think. How do you all view youth participation as a congregation? And I know maybe that's kind of a lot of pressure to ask you to speak on behalf of a congregation, but how do you view youth participation in the wider church community outside of just the youth program? Like, how do you see youth incorporating?
Kristen is getting a workout, but we're grateful for that. If you're new to our class, hold on just a second. If you're new to this setting, we broadcast this live on the internet, and we record it, which means that if you don't use a microphone, we might hear you, but they certainly can't hear you. So that's why we insist that you wait and use a microphone. Yes, sir.
So I might have misunderstood your question, but
It's okay.
youth participation from my perspective? Okay. So I think I really enjoyed coming to Sunday school, church on Sundays, Wednesdays, and then the youth events afterward. But I did find that there were a lot of people my age that would like to come to youth events, but really didn't like the church aspects. And so I found that they wouldn't come. So that's understandable, but I just figured that's useful information.
It is useful information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Blythe?
So I understand your point about kind of gathering everyone together and seeing who's coming or who's not. However, one perspective on that is preventative from younger kids to engage if the range is too wide, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So maybe possibly if that's not working as well, then maybe start off with smaller groups, develop comfort level, and then merge into larger groups. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does.
So, if you've got a young child and there's somebody there who's 18 with car keys, that, 11-year-old is certainly not going to want to come back.
Yeah.
So, anyway, maybe the converse might be more effective. I don't know, but consider that.
Thank you. That's really helpful input.
I think we'll find out pretty quickly. But I think I think we kind of approach this not really knowing who will walk through the door on a Sunday morning. But I think within a very few weeks, we'll be able to figure out pretty quickly what opportunities there are for splits. Also, I think we'll work pretty hard to make sure that our volunteers and other adults who are present know how to engage, especially the younger kids, if the older kids are sort of dominating that conversation. We certainly don't want that first experience to be kind of a souring experience. But yeah. But Emma's told me that we want to adapt as quickly as we can. So in other words, show up. Like show up on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and Wednesday nights so that we can say, ooh, look, we've got, this is definitely a split time or definitely not a split time. Yeah, show up. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
I also am interested in the conversation where all the kids are together by age. I have one who will be young and coming to that situation. I love the idea of all age groups interacting. I think that it's important to acknowledge that the older kids don't know how to appropriately engage the younger kids, and that in a leadership role, in my opinion, doing that, instructing them so that it's not separate groups all in the same physical space, but taking a leadership position and teaching the older kids how to interact with the younger kids and the older kids how to interact with older adults. And I just think, I love the idea of it all together, personally. And if from the broader question about what's the role of our youth in our church, I think it's everything. It is the reason we exist in many ways, because we won't be here in 5, 10, 15 years without them. So,
Trent?
Thank you. So my wife Chrissy and I just got back from a week at Camp Mitchell with the Dick Johnson camp session. And one of the things that was important to me is, I grew up going to camp, and there's some camp sessions I went to where the counselors were all there for themselves. And there are others where they were there obviously for the campers, having fun, but still able to be there for the campers and to mentor the campers. And I can see how youth group could be a place where older youth start learning how to not just be there for themselves, but to be there for younger kids in the youth group. I mean, that would take time to develop that, I would think, that mentality, but I would see that to be a real challenge, and I hope we can grow our youth group into that, where we put out those kind of older kids that see themselves not just there for themselves, but for the other kids in the group. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, just to kind of chime in on all of that, I genuinely feel like youth in the church have a lot of untapped potential, and I think that they are maybe not always given the space to present that. It's really hard to kind of stand up and put yourself out there when you get told a lot all day, like what to do. But I think that, yeah, I think leadership happens and mentorship happens and will happen if given kind of the structure for it. And I'm really confident that we can, as a community, kind of work through that. I think there's a lot of potential for that. I'm not nervous yet. I've been here like 4 hours, so. It could all be really bad.
I'll also say I've worked in a couple of churches where sort of the youth group was this sort of a transitional size, smaller than our youth group. And so not really big enough to sustain 2 completely different groups. And so as a result, you end up with one large group, which is great. But one thing that was always difficult is I heard a lot of, we want the older youth to mentor the younger youth, and that's great, and we want to do that. But sometimes you want to not be a mentor, sometimes you want to be a youth, right? And so, and just as 6th graders have a hard time letting their voices be heard when there are 11th graders in the room, so too do 12th graders want to be able to be 12th graders without having to sort of play duck, duck, goose with what feels, I mean, it's not really that, but to them it feels like that. So I think there's a balance, and we want to hold both of that, right? Yeah.
Oh,
Norma.
I was just going to mention, and I know you're aware of this, but so many things that our youth can be involved in besides youth group here, including camp. There were some kids I know that were contemporaries of my children that just did camp. They just did happening or, AYE, but they didn't necessarily do stuff at church. And then, of course, there were kids that did choir, and there were kids that did just youth group, just Wednesday night. So there's so many, just being cognizant of that I don't know if there can be any umbrella overseeing all the different they're not conflicting. I don't want to use that word, but it's time.
Yeah, kids have a lot of
constraints
pressure on their
on-
time.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to be all the things.
Yeah, it's just a lot for some kids to try to do all those things, so, yeah. That's just a perspective.
No, thank you.
don't
I
have
appreciate
any-
that. Sorry, I'm not talking.
Anything else to say about that?
I think you remind me, Norma, that looking out here, I see some of you who are dedicated 7:30 people who hung around, for which I'm grateful. Some of you just finished 8:45, and some of you are going to 11. Many of you don't normally come to the adult forum, or at least I don't see you because you're in another class or another setting. In the adult world, we have lots of different communities that rarely overlap. And if we presume that on a regular basis, everybody would always come and do the same thing, we would miss a lot of people. And so, I love the fact that we're a part of a church that is multifaceted, not only with our youth, but also with our adults and our kids too. Yeah. Kristen.
Just to reiterate what you were saying, because that was something that I was thinking, to have the older kids as leaders and everything, but the older kids do need the guidance and they have questions as well, because as you get to be 10th, 11th, 12th grader, you may not want to ask something or say something because it's not something that you want to talk about with a 6th grader in the room. Their issues and what they're dealing with at school, on social media, with their friends, with their parents. Your kids definitely may not want to talk to you about some things, but you always want your kid to be able to go to someone to talk to. So ideally that would be you or you, but to have that balance of the whole group and individuals to be able to talk about their issues that they're really going through. So
Yeah, I do also think that's really important. I think, maybe I didn't say it well enough earlier, but I do think older and younger groups, and to some extent, like gender groups and things like that, create kind of safer spaces for those individuals, like to kind of have people who are in their context a little bit better. And I definitely, it's sounding like that cream's gonna rise to the top pretty quickly in terms of creating those spaces, and maybe in new ways, maybe in some of the ways we've had, but just kind of doing things all together to kind of establish the community, but also creating those kind of pockets and smaller groups, I think will definitely it sounds like it's gonna happen, which I'm excited about.
And I do appreciate the fact that you are open to when the times are whatever and just kind of see what happens,
Yeah, maybe just to put it out there, just as a minister in the church or someone doing ministry, my job is to respond to the needs of the congregation. And so I think you all giving me input and feedback is really welcomed. Maybe don't yell at me, but please tell me, I want to hear what's happening in terms of if you feel like you're being ministered to, if you feel like this is being fruitful, and I want that always to be kind of an open conversation. So please don't feel like you can't tell me things about ministry or how you think things are going, because I think that has to stay an evolving process always.
Before Christine asks her question, you can go ahead and move there. Kristen touched on something that I'd love to hear you say more about. I know I think I saw that you're planning to say this tonight to parents and youth, but there are others in the room that might enjoy hearing about this. How do you handle a youth who comes and tells you something confidentially? How do you receive that information, and how do you navigate that careful boundary between what a youth is telling you and what you need to share with other adults, like their parents?
Let's talk about it. Okay, so I think it's really important to be able to talk to people outside of your family unit or your peer unit, other adults. It was really important for me growing up to have other adults who weren't my parents that I could talk to about things. My general rule is that if you share something with me confidentially, it stays confidential unless it's something that is going to be harmful to yourself or to others. And then there's a requirement that I get a parent involved or a guardian involved. But I also think that can be a conversation where myself or Evan or whoever is kind of holding this information with you, or this problem or whatever it is that you've shared, can be a support through that conversation. It's not like, great, I have to go tattle to your parents now, but let's talk about how we can get you some help or get you some support for that issue. I think I hope that parents trust me to know where that line is, and I can tell you that I do, but you probably won't believe it until you see it in action. But I think it's really important to know kind of what warrants like harmful behavior that we need adults involved, or kind of something that's maybe just venting or frustration and getting that out, as opposed to language around something that might be harmful. So that just comes from experience of working with kids in training.
And let me say that as the rector here, I trust you to know those boundaries. And I also trust that you'll involve me in those conversations, to where if you're wondering about a particular circumstance, what do we do? How do we handle that? That you'll include me or Suzanne or another priest in that confidential conversation. Again, not in interest
Priests are
of
really
tattling.
good at keeping things confidential.
Not in the interest of tattling, but to know that if you ever have any concerns, that you don't have to be the only person to carry that. And so I trust you in that way. And through that, I invite parents to trust you as well. And I'm sure they do and will. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe to the youth that are in the room also, like, remembering that in the way that Evan trusts me, like, I trust you to be able, I mean, again, we've known each other for like 4 hours, but to trust me to hold things with you if needed, and that I'm here as a support, not just someone to put on large group games on Sunday afternoons, but to lead you and guide you in all those ways. So
thank you. Christine.
I don't really have a question,
Oh,
but I want to address back to what Norma said, and I just want to say, from knowing Emma for a long time, who spent a lot of time in my home, that she went to AYE. She was in choir, youth group, Camp Mitchell, choir.
yeah, but like,
camp.
I didn't play sports, so.
She did every activity in this church that it had to offer, and all the outside activities that the youth do.
It was still super cool. Like, don't worry. A lot of friends.
So I think she does.
A lot of friends in high school, don't you worry. No, I did a lot. I did a lot at church, yeah.
You did.
Nerdily
They were-
enthusiastic was the word I used.
Every time the doors were open, her and her friends were here all the time. So I think Emma really understands that and gets that from a youth perspective, and we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Other questions for Emma? Yes.
I grew up in a youth group in our church, and it was very active, and I remember that so well, and I think it helped me so much. We had a reunion a few years ago, and a lot of that youth came back to that reunion and expressed
awesome.
how meaningful it was. So, this is of tremendous importance, the work that you're doing. I think the thing that they help me with most, and I think it's still important for youth today, is helping me to discern and make good choices in my life, and also develop good habits. So
Yeah.
I think those are the things I remember being helped with most.
Yeah, I think, youth group provided a structure, or youth ministry provided a structure for me that I really value and still value today. That doesn't mean that it works for everybody. And again, like, I was a super cool kid, not a nerd, but a super cool kid that hung out at church like 4 days a week. But I do think it can be a place that's really formative in that way too. It's not just, we're going to read the Bible and talk about God all the time, but like, here's how we are as people, and here's how we're going to act in community together. I do think that's really valuable. Yeah.
So I just have a quick question. Is there a role, or is there a place for senior citizens, not just seniors in high school, senior citizens and our 40, 50 years of experience in how you will be working with youth? In other words, would you ever call on senior citizens if you needed some expertise or some experience that they might have? Or do you kind of separate the old folks from the younger folks?
So when I was at Trinity, I did some work with, we also had a saging group there. I think that senior citizens are like an untapped force in the world, just like youth are an untapped force. And you actually, both groups have a lot in common. They've like started to do research about how senior citizens and folks from like 18 to kind of mid to late 20s have a lot in common in terms of career change and establishing new life routines and things like that. And so I do think there's a lot of wisdom and benefit to having age groups relate to each other, and that not just senior citizens and youth and millennials and older adults, but all of those together. I think every group has something to learn from each other. And so I do think there is a place to kind of hear stories from one another, hear advice from one another, and making that a really two-way street so that senior citizens also get to hear kind of what's present and happening in the lives of youth today.
I've found it helpful to think of potential volunteers, trusting that everybody has something to offer. And if youth ministry is something that interests you, regardless of your age, then we've got an opportunity for you. And the group ministries architects, who also talks about sort of youth ministries architects and their work, they identify volunteers in 3 different kind of categories. There are some volunteers who are really good at teaching, at offering an instruction, at leading a program, at kind of facilitating that. That's a special gift. Not everybody has that gift, but the people who have it are good at it. Then there are people on the other end of the spectrum who aren't really good at interacting with youth in this case, but are really good at providing a meal or helping with administrative things or helping with communication or writing notes of encouragement when it's appropriate. But in the middle, there's a large group of people who might not be ready or gifted to teach a class or lead something, but who can come and join. I remember in my teenage years how important it was for me to see that there were adults who cared enough about me to show up every week. And it doesn't matter whether they're 22 or 82. If they show up and say, how are you? How's your week? And just to participate, that's wonderful. So absolutely a place for that. Excuse me. And we have some sage insight. Amanda.
I just want to say very quickly, as a mama and as a retired youth minister, I couldn't be more thrilled about the calling of Emma Mitchell to this church. Mm-hmm. Not only was she taken up from this church and knows the ethos and the culture in her DNA, I've watched her as an adult youth minister in camp and different places, and she is an exquisite leader, and you are so lucky. I am so lucky to have my children in her program, and I just want to thank you all for calling her here because she's amazing.
Thank you.
Set that bar real high.
I couldn't imagine a better way to end. Thank you. Emma, would you remind us what your plans are for us this evening, this afternoon?
Yes, certain people in this room have already said they can't come because they have to work, and that's okay. But at 4:30, we're going to have ice cream in the youth building and talk about kind of the year coming up and some schedule stuff and norms and expectations, and then do some like fun hangouty stuff with the youth, and parents will get some time with Evan if they have more questions and specific things to ask, and it should be a good time. 4:30.
So youth and parents.
Youth and parents.
4:30,
and then we'll
youth
split.
building. If you can't be there, what should we look for?
Communication via email very soon.
Great. And we're going to need you to give us your preferred contact information so that we can make sure that we have that. We want to be sure that everybody who wants to hear about our youth program does. So look out for that. Thank you, Emma, for joining us.
Thank
I
you all.
appreciate
I'm
it.
really excited to be here.
Thank you all.